Chapter 5, Consumerism. What consumerism really is, at its worst, is getting people to buy things that don't actually improve their lives. Jeff Bezos.
In the way we can see it today, consumer society emerged as a direct consequence of the Industrial Revolution that started in the mid-18th century. We can argue that humanity has taken the wrong turn down the road of development. This has eventually led us to things like Black Friday, when driven by the urge to consume, people destroy stores and hurt each other to be the first to get their hands on what they believe to be a bargain. Yet in reality, the consumer society is the only possible outcome in the world of dominant capitalism and globalization. Moreover, it will get worse since we have long ago reached the stages of overproduction and didn't show any sign of slowing down. It is never too late to pull the emergency brake to stop the skyrocketing overconsumption. But let's face the truth, no one will. It is true that private businesses created competition between manufacturers, resulting in a market full of the widest range of goods to satisfy everyone. And while the modern model of behavior is getting highly condemned and criticized for its tremendous impact on the mental health of today's society and ecology, especially in countries with well-developed economies, no one would really want to have it any other way, since we are accustomed to having everything we desire readily available to us. A few natural ways to destroy consumer society would be to stop producing available goods in wide ranges, or restrict credit money to people, to limit their purchasing power. Since both options are not profitable, they have zero chance of being implemented. Ironically, the unavoidable extreme madness of modern consumer culture is the price we pay for the availability of goods we consume. Let's take a trip down memory lane to understand the current situation. The drastic shifts in everyday life began being accrued in the mid-17th century during the British Agricultural Revolution, known as Second Agricultural Revolution. The first one happened about 10,000 years prior, when humanity transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture and domestication of animals. So, as you may notice, people had had enough time to finally come up with something different. The changes in technologies of planting crops, the invention of new and modernization of already existing agricultural tools such as the plow, the threshing machine and seed drills, ushered in a new era of productivity and efficiency, significantly reducing the need for manual labor. And while some folks were still busy growing wonders of the New World, such as corn, tomatoes, and potatoes that had been thoughtfully brought from overseas during the Columbian Exchange, others dropped their hoes, speaking of garden tools here, straightened their backs, wiped the sweat off their faces, and were scratching their foreheads trying to figure out what to do with the abundance of leisure time. The very fact that humanity found a way not to spend all time in hands in producing food worked as a predecessor to another turning point in human history, the First Industrial Revolution. Industrialization in England started with mechanized textile spinning. The significant growth of steam power made it possible to improve coal mining, which together with other innovations increased iron production. The implementation of machinery tools made production faster and cheaper. Factories started growing, birthing urban cities around them as people started moving for jobs. The rise of the economy was great. While it is questionable that ordinary workers were benefiting much from early capitalism, the market was growing along with the production, and previously luxurious things like china and porcelain tableware, cast iron utensils, textile products, clocks, mirrors, and other stuff were becoming affordable even for regular people. The first department store in London, the booming of confectionery, the first ever heart-shaped chocolate box for Valentine's Day in 1868, the availability of various services, the first soft drinks, all that and more happened during the century of the First Industrial Revolution. A new world emerged from black clouds of thick factory smoke, and the best was yet to come. The Second Industrial Revolution started in the second half of the 19th century. Sir Henry Bessemer introduced the technique for producing cheap steel, which propelled the vast expansion of railroad connections, that together with widespread telegraph lines, led to another wave of globalization. Gas and water supply, along with sewage systems, were developing in major cities. In the glow of a filament light bulb, Thomas Edison was hollering over the Bell's phone at Nikola Tesla that his idea of alternating current was worthless. John Rockefeller eavesdropped on the conversation and was thrown into a state of alarm. He hadn't realized yet that electrification was a blessing in disguise and that dealing in petrol would be way more profitable than supplying kerosene for lamps. Henry Ford was looking suspiciously at the pulley system in a slaughterhouse for so long that he eventually came up with the idea of an assembly line for his Ford Model T. This dropped the price of the four-wheel wonder from almost $1,000 to $290 American. Overproduction driven by total electrification was pushing people towards overconsumption. The rivalry between manufacturers competing for tremendous profits overflooded the market with luxuries that were becoming more and more available to the working class, and made the market grow way faster than the purchasing power of potential buyers. And while mass production was indeed bringing tons of money, it was major companies that made the biggest gain, not the workers. The last chance for society to resist overconsumption was eventually taken away with the introduction of the credit system, installment buying, and advertisements through the radio, movies, and eventually, television. By any possible means, people were constantly triggered to buy things they had no money for, to prolong advertised happiness and fun. In reality, they got themselves into debt, only to throw some coal into the furnace of the crazy train of capitalism. Tell me that we live our lives differently these days. The third industrial revolution, the digital revolution, is marked as a shift to digital technologies that happened in the second part of the 20th century. Mass production stays with us. It didn't go anywhere. Moreover, it even became more mass, since the changes in technologies that introduced automation gave the opportunity to produce even more goods and for less money. Banking systems also prospered big time. The invention of credit cards and the further evolution of credit helped put the crowd on a hook of consumerism even more, continuously throwing the American dream at everyone who couldn't hide. Life was in full swing. Cheap Arabian oil, the most critical propeller of the modern economy, flowed like a river. Americans were driving long purchased on credit money Cadillacs, from their big purchased on credit money houses, to giant built on credit money department stores and back. Trucks, locomotives and ships were delivering cargo all over the globe, and nothing could possibly spoil the developed society. Well, in 1973, Faisal of Saudi Arabia decided that the oil was too cheap, and withdrew Saudi black gold from the world markets, in this way interrupting the prosperous lives of the civilized world with the oil crisis. Unfortunately, Faisal was murdered 2 years later by his nephew, who apparently didn't share his uncle's views and ideas on democracy. Americans did make a clumsy attempt to switch to manufacturing tiny cars with little engines. However, a decade later, they recalled they still had a bunch of dusty motors with enormous displacement tucked away in the warehouses, and soon returned to building the cars they excelled at. And to prove they were not kidding, in 1989, Dodge rolled out the first-gen Viper, a true American supercar without a roof and with an 8-liter V10 pickup truck engine inside. There were a few reasons for that. First, they could. Second, it was fun. Third, supplies of cocaine were still unlimited in some structures. Fourth, no replacement for displacement. Fifth, Greta was not born yet. The invention of the pinnacle of human civilization, the almighty Internet, was yet to transform into an endless source of memes and distraction from the cruelty of the world. At the beginning of its era, it helped not only to communicate faster but also further escalated globalization, since it gave the opportunity to businesses of all sizes to reach their potential clients in every corner of the world. The possibility to wire virtual money all over the planet put a cherry on top of the sales markets that had been already believed to be expanded to the fullest. Standards of living, at least in first world countries with well-developed economies, were becoming unprecedented. Overproduction, which relied on overconsumption, led into development of media, which made it possible to run aggressive advertisement campaigns to program people to spend more and more. Advertising itself has become an enormous industry that used and keeps using any possible source to communicate one and only idea to the crowd: spend. The biggest trouble, for regular folks, occurred when the society, that had been under mad pressure to consume, had completely absorbed the materialistic model of happiness. For too long, people were conditioned to judge each other by their possessions and the number of dollars in their bank accounts. Ironically, by chasing materialistic happiness, we find no happiness at all. Instead, we seek validation of our worth from those around us. We constantly compare ourselves to each other, driven by the fear of appearing inferior, which can lead to negative downfall. And let's be honest, with the opportunity to compare ourselves that social media has provided for us, we all are meant to fail. The inability to possess something we might not genuinely need, but we're taught and convinced that specific something had a significant meaning for us, leads nowhere but to constant anxiety and belittling of our self-worth. Out of nowhere, we find ourselves unable to meet someone else's set standards of well-being. And that is basically the idea of how we get manipulated into consuming more, only to escape the feeling that we are worse than the folks around us. We are conditioned that we constantly need to prove our value to people, who in most cases don't care about us at all, because they are busy impressing someone else, who doesn't care about them, creating an endless cycle. Our minds that are never at ease are the price for the abundance that was initially supposed to make us truly happy. Humanity has long become not only the resource of capitalism but also its product. And while we can blame capitalists for they have turned the world into a money-making machine, an example of a completely different world used to exist for over 70 years. The world without capitalism, overproduction, and total deficit in almost every aspect of the market, the USSR. There were no private industries and thereby no rivalry between manufacturers for buyers' money. The state, represented by the only party, dictated production choices and quantities. Let's take the car market for example. There were a handful of state factories that produced quite a limited number of models. Manufacturing progressed at a sluggish pace because the state was not interested in expanding production by building more factories, a move that private industry owners would have made promptly. The purchasing power of a regular person was sufficient to buy food and clothes and limited options of leisure, but insufficient for a car. A monthly income of a Soviet engineer was 120 rubles, while the pinnacle of the Soviet car industry, Gaz-24 Volga, cost 15,000 rubles. The complete absence of credit helped to maintain slow production. The waiting period of a car was 5+ years for a person. If someone couldn't gather enough money by that time, they would miss the opportunity and wait another 5 years. The presence of at least 2 private car companies would not only have doubled the speed of production, but also created competition. The manufacturers would have been compelled to develop new technologies to make their products more appealing to the buyer, which would have stimulated industrial progress. But in the USSR, production and development were solely under the state's control. However, comrades were busy making weapons and building communism. In a world like this, everyone used to be equally happy or equally unhappy, depending on your perspective. The inability to stand out from the rest of the crowd was firmly keeping a citizen's mental health at peace, since in most cases, people were not flexing their material possessions to each other. But the truth is, it is impossible to share everything that is manufactured equally between folks. The easiest way to achieve equality is to confiscate material goods from them. The idea of communism, at its core, implies the absence of money as an intermediate unit in the process of exchanging goods, which, if you think about it, destroys the motivation of society to progress. If working more is not rewarding, people would not opt for it. And since everyone is equal, a variety of consumer goods should also not be an option. So, the bottom line, the rivalry of capitalists drives civilization's progress. At the same time, extremely profitable overproduction intentionally puts society under pressure to overconsume, and leads to ecological problems such as excessive use of natural resources. The question arises, what can be done so we, the people, can finally take it easy? Answer: Hypothetically, the state should be the regulative tool that would limit the production and use of resources. In real life, despite finding ways to address ecological problems in one way or another, we, people, can't really regulate production, since prosperous capitalism has long switched to oligarchy, and top sharks of this world have a direct influence on politics. No one will ever stop doing something that brings tremendous profit. In the situation humanity has ended up in these days, I encourage you to do one thing. Stop caring. It means stop being influenced by advertisements. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Abandon seeking happiness in materialistic possessions. And when you genuinely stop caring, and finally wake up from the trance, when you take the pressure of overconsumption off your shoulders, only then will you discover that our modern world is pretty okay. You will discover that it is actually the best time ever to be alive, since most of us have literally everything within our reach to lead a happy and safe life. Instead of being the product of capitalism, start benefiting from their rivalry. Only when you realize that your possessions and wealth do not determine your worth, will you obtain true happiness and peace.